Hey, what's up guys, it's CalebX01 back again filming for a series that I haven't filmed for in a little while, being my music top 10 series. And for today's episode, doing my top 10 favourite debut albums. Yes, debut albums, I guess a pretty standard idea for a list, I know. I just went through my favourite artists and bands and obviously picked out my top 10 debut albums from them. So, I just want to remind you guys, this list is my favourite debut albums. I'm not telling you this is a definitive list, or these are the best debut albums of all time. This list is personalised for me, and we are probably going to have different opinions. You know, there might be some similarities, there might be things that we agree and disagree on. That's fine. If you want to put your list in the comments below, go for it, or if you have a say on any of the albums that I have in my list, go for it, but just want to remind you guys, this list is personalised for me. If you are familiar with my channel, you guys know the sort of music that I listen to, but I try not to pigeonhole myself into certain genres, so there might be some surprises also, but I just want to remind you guys of that. And then also, before we get into it, I just want to sort of tell you how I ranked my 10 albums once I picked out my favourite 10. Obviously, a no-brainer here, they have to be debut albums. It has to be from an artist or band's discography and be their first full-length studio album. Whenever I sort of struggled on, positioning in this top 10, I wasn't sure to put one over another. I also factored in the album's quality, as in, they are my favourites, but is the album really that great also? And then I also factored in, did this album set the artist or band going forward? Because there are plenty of artists who have great debuts and then you sort of don't really hear from them again. So that also sort of weighed into my top 10, more so just if I had, a tie and I couldn't figure out to put one over another. That's sort of the things that helped me out, but other than that, it's purely just favourites, guys, and I won't rabble on any longer. Let's get into this list. My top 10 favourite debut albums, starting off with number 10. So as I said, the people that are familiar with my channel and know me and the types of genres that I normally listen to, this is one that might go down as a surprise, but coming in at my number 10 is Katy Perry's debut album, One of the Boys. I actually am a pretty big fan of Katy Perry, more so her earlier stuff, because I haven't really listened to too many of her albums after Prism, which I believe is her third studio album. So I'm more so a early Katy Perry fan. However, still, I feel like a lot of people undermined and overlooked this album. A lot of people want to pigeonhole Katy Perry as this basic mainstream pop artist, which, to be fair, in her later discography very much so is. However, this album is really diverse and quite interesting. A lot of people would probably presume that it's a basic pop album. However, I would categorize this album as pop rock. Whenever people think of this album, I know this is a bit of a throwback. They would probably think of songs like I Kissed a Girl, Waking Up in Vegas, Hot and Cold, which is fair enough. However, the track list goes much, much deeper than that. And as I said, there are many songs that are influenced by pop rock on here. I'm talking about the title track, One of the Boys. There's Mannequin, Self-Inflicted, Fingerprints. There are so many tracks on this album that are underrated, and I think a lot of people don't know. And as I said, this is probably Katy Perry's peak album. This is my favourite Katy Perry album. And I would really love it if she went back to making music like this. Yes, it's probably not going to get over with a lot of mainstream audiences like her newer music is. However, I just feel like there are so many more layers to the type of music that she puts forward on this album. So I think that would be really, really interesting. But coming in at my number 10 is Katy Perry's album, One of the Boys. Coming in for my number 9 is Good Charlotte and their self-titled album. Now, I always sort of forget how much I actually really do like Good Charlotte. I wouldn't say that they're in my top 5 bands, maybe not even in my top 10, but floating somewhere around there. Yeah, I've always sort of had a soft spot for Good Charlotte. I know a lot of people would probably say that their sophomore album, The Young and the Hopeless, is their favourite of the band. However, I would probably say this one is my favourite. Nostalgia plays into that a lot because I remember growing up, this one would often be playing in the background, whether it was my dad playing it, my brother, and then of course growing up me. I just always had a soft spot for this one, and don't get me wrong, I can see how a lot of people would pick The Young and the Hopeless over this one, but for me, I just feel like this is my personal favourite, so I had to find a spot for it on my list. Of course, number 9, there are ones that I prefer over this one, but this is one I can always put on and reliably have a good time with it. You know, it's not setting the world on fire, but always when I put it on, consistently find enjoyment from it. So had to find a spot on my top 10 for it. So my number 9 is Good Charlotte's self-titled album. Coming in at my number 8 is Neck Deep and their debut album, Wishful Thinking. Yes, Neck Deep, a relatively newer band. For those who are unaware, I'm pretty sure they established themselves in 2014, but since hitting the scene, man, they have blown up, and this is where it all started. A lot of people would say, Bakes, this is just generic punk pop. I really do like generic punk pop a lot of the time. I'm not going to bullshit you guys. And a lot of it, you know, as I said, it's pretty basic, it's pretty simple and what you would expect for that sort of subgenre, but man, if I don't have fun coming back to this one. I find a lot of enjoyment from it. Yes, it's not the band's best effort, but for what it is and setting the band forward, I really do enjoy this one, so I had to find a spot for it on my list. Couldn't put it any higher than number 8 though, so coming in at my number 8 is Neck Deep and their debut album, Wishful Thinking. Coming in at my number 7 is actually an album I don't own, but the album is Red, Green or In Between by the band Waster. Now, a lot of the things that I said for my number 8, which was Neck Deep's Wishful Thinking, I could say for this one. Yes, it is generic punk pop, but it is generic punk pop done well, and man, do I find so much enjoyment from this album. I know a lot of people would be saying there are a lot of similarities to this and Wishful Thinking. I don't want to keep comparing the two. I know a lot of people would be probably leaning to Wishful Thinking over this one. Yes, Neck Deep are a bigger band, but I've always felt like Waster are incredibly underrated, and of course, obviously by the ranking on this list, I choose this one over Wishful Thinking. I just feel like a lot of the songs have a lot more personality, attitude, pack a lot more energy. So honestly, I find myself coming back to this one over Wishful Thinking. Obviously, I don't want to take anything away from Wishful Thinking or keep comparing the two, but yes, this album is generic punk pop, but man, do I have a lot of fun. And I also just want to set the band Waster onto a lot of you guys' radar. You know, if you're into punk pop genres and that style of music, this is definitely an album that I would recommend. So coming in at my number 7 is Red, Green or In Between by the band Waster. Now coming in for my number 6 is the album Feel Something by the band Movements. Now this was the album that introduced me to the band, and man, have I been hooked ever since. I just think the band Movements just in general have just been on the incline since, but this album is the one that kicked it off, and man, does it still hold up. If you're unfamiliar with the band Movements, they make emo, rock, punk style music. And there are so many songs on here that I just find myself always coming back to, whether it's Third Degree, the first song I ever heard by the band being Colorblind, Daylily, Suffer Through. There are so many great songs on this album. This album really still holds up. And again, this is an album I feel like a lot of people may be unfamiliar with, and I definitely still would recommend. I know Movements over time are slowly evolving their sound, definitely with the two newer songs that they've put out being Cherry Thrills and Barbed Wire Body. Those songs are more emo dance, which is a very unique mix, but still would recommend this album very much. This was one of my favourites of the year that it came out, and as I said, still to this day it holds up. So coming in at my number 6 is Feel Something by the band Movements. Coming in at my number 5, again an album that I don't own, but it is the debut album by the band Waterparks, being Double Dare. Double Dare is an album, I'm not gonna lie, I originally didn't really click with. I always liked Waterparks as a band, don't get me wrong, there were a lot of singles that I enjoyed. However, never really found a click. I knew there was a lot of people that really started jumping on the bandwagon once they started getting big, and I just didn't really get the hype maybe. However, after just really letting maybe some of their later albums sink in, whether it was Entertainment, which to be fair wasn't that great of an album, but even Fandom, I went back to this album again after some time, and I enjoyed it a lot more. Very unique sound that they have, whether, you know, it's some slower tracks or some more pop-punk leaning tracks. I find this album to be really enjoyable. I know that some people really don't like this band. I'm not going to get into the, I guess, controversies and everything that come with this band and, you know, its members, but for what all it is, I really do enjoy this album. So coming in at my number 5 is Waterparks and their debut album, Double Dare. For my number 4, again, is an album that I don't own, but every album from here on I do own, so don't worry about that. But it is the debut album by the band Grayscale, being Adornment. Again, this was sort of an album that at first I didn't really click with. I sort of more so jumped into Grayscale when they released their sophomore album, Nulla Vita. But the more I listened to Nulla Vita, the more I wanted to sort of sink my teeth deeper into Grayscale, so of course I went back to Adornment, and something clicked and I enjoyed this album a lot more. I'd probably say that I like this one over Nulla Vita now. Yes, some people would say, oh, it's just generic punk pop again. I would say it's quite different to the ones that I was saying earlier, being Wishful Thinking by Neck Deep and Red Green or In Between by Waster, because those two albums are more, you know, sort of skate style. This sound is a lot more polished, and they do a lot more experimental stuff with their style of music. But I'm sure this album has a lot of fans, and I just want to recommend it for you guys. I know how much I like this album. So coming in at my number 4 is Grayscale's Adornment. Breaking into my top 3 now, and coming in at my 3rd place is the band Bearings and their debut album, Blue in the Dark. Now, I remember when I first came across this album, the first thing I noticed was, from playing it start to finish, how much consistency this album has. And I know when I say consistency, a lot of people are going to be like, consistency, what does that have to do with anything? The worst songs on this album are probably at least average. You know, everything from there on is probably better. There are no real bad songs on this album, and I can just imagine being able to pull that off for a debut. I know this band are young and probably still even sort of finding their feet and finding their true sound. I feel like the band is evolving, and I wouldn't say that this is going to be the band's best effort. I don't know, I'm sort of 50-50 on that, because even their follow-up album has less consistency but probably better bangers. But I'm getting off topic. I just think this is a really strong effort for the band's debut, and I want to highlight that. So coming in at my number 3 is the band Bearings and their album Blue in the Dark. Now coming in at my number 2 is a little bit of a dark horse. Maybe some people didn't expect this album to show up on my list, or at least show up this high. I know that I didn't expect it to be this high. I knew it was going to be in my top 10, but I have Panic at the Disco's A Fever You Can't Sweat Out. Now, Panic at the Disco as a band have never been, you know, artists that I really specifically seek out or come back to quite often. It's not like I'm ever avoiding Panic at the Disco. However, I would never say they're like in my top 10 favorites. However, this album, every time I hear it and listen to it from start to finish, or, you know, a song comes on that I sort of forget about, I just find myself enjoying it every single time, every time. There are so many songs on this album that I just forget how amazing they are, and really, again, I just praise Panic at the Disco for finding such a really solid sound so early, such a unique sound. I would say the only band that I can think of off the top of my head that sounded like this at the time would have been Fall Out Boy or something similar to that. I know Fall Out Boy sort of can be praised for coming across Panic at the Disco and helping them find their feet as a band, but man, this album really blows me away, and I think a lot of people sort of undermine this album. As I said, a little bit of a dark horse for maybe you guys watching. I know it was for me, but coming in at my number 2 is Panic at the Disco's A Fever You Can't Sweat Out, and let's get into my number 1 now. Now, coming in at my number 1 is the band Beartooth, and of course their debut album Disgusting. Now, if you've seen my review and track list ranking of this album, this may not be a surprise because I really do fucking love this album very, very much. This album is a heavy metal album, but it has a good mix of clean and screaming vocals, such catchy hooks and choruses. I mean, this album really has just blown me away since the first time I've heard it, and it just fucking still holds up to this day. I could talk about this album all day. If you want to hear my full thoughts on it, of course, as I said, I would recommend listening to my review of this album, but I just think the band fucking smashed it out of the park with their first album, and I don't think they've reached their peak again since. I believe this is the band's best album, and I would really love it if they could return to form. I know that bands evolve and change over time. I don't think they've changed their sound drastically, but man, I would just love it if Beartooth went back to something like this and really got into doing some catchy hooks and choruses again, and just finding this really good balance between screaming and clean vocals again. But let's just wrap it up there. My number 1 is Beartooth and their album Disgusting. So thank you for joining me for today's episode, guys. I really enjoyed putting this list together, and I hope you guys enjoyed watching it. Of course, as I said, guys, we might have different opinions, but if you want to let me know your top 10 debut albums of all time, let me know in the comments below. It doesn't even need to be related to the genres that I featured on this channel. Just let me know your top 10 list, or if you have a say on any of the albums that I featured here in my list, go ahead, let me know in the comments below. But otherwise, as I said, guys, thank you for watching. Feel free to like and subscribe, and hopefully I will see you guys again for some more content soon. Peace.